Welcome to At Ease with Cooking. I'm Bonnie Kerschke, your host. Have you ever wished that you had some meat entrees that were just a little bit different than the things you normally serve? Something that you could serve to your family and friends that would make them sit up and take notice. Well, then our program this evening, Unique Beef Entrees, is going to be just what you're looking for. And once again, we have our favorite meat cutter, John King, back with us, and he's going to be showing us some cuts of meat that perhaps you've seen in the meat counter, but you really weren't quite sure what to do with them. After he shows them, we're going to give you some recipes that'll tell you what to do with those cuts. And we're going to start with a strip steak sandwich. Hiya, John.
Hi.
Nice to have you back again.
Thanks for having me back. I think that's unique too, because the last couple times the way I butchered things up when I was with you. But we got here, as you brought out, something very unique. It's referred to as a skirt steak. Skirt steak sandwich, that's what we're going to call it. And it falls in the category of the meats you mentioned being unique, that we kind of label them as the one step beyond or the twilight zone, the meat cutters, because these are cuts of meat we're going to talk about today, along with many others, that not just young child brides, but middle-aged cooks as well as senior citizens, they come and they see it in the counter. They say, "What is this here? What? How do you cook it? How do you prepare it?" So this is one of them here, the skirt steaks. In fact, I'd ask the TV audience if they ever did cook one, or they've heard of it if they've ever had one. But what it is a piece of skirt that comes from the inside of a forequarter. This is the way you'd probably find it in the counter, similar to this, and it weighs approximately 3/4 of a pound to a pound.
Okay.
And it's, as I brought from the inside of the forequarters, you probably would recognize it in another form. Last time you bought pork spare ribs. Well, if you look on the now spare ribs, not backwards, pork spare ribs. You look on the inside of the spare rib, you'll see a couple small strips of meat, which are very tasty, and that's the skirt that comes from the pig. This, of course, comes from the cattle. Now, what's unique about this is the fact, as the other piece of meats we'll talk about, they have their own individual taste too. It's something a little bit different. And you see something else here. This is not a normal bright red color like beef, but it's kind of a reddish brown. And if you see that, don't be turned off by it. The fact is that that's the proper color for it in the counter. Now, we have a recipe. We mentioned a skirt steak sandwich. What we're going to do is get this ready. And this is a recipe that was given to me by two of my favorite customers, Isabel and Sammy. And in fact, they were members of an old vaudeville team. And when they gave me this, I felt they probably had to leave town very quickly, and they needed a quick sandwich from time to time. But the secret is if you looked at it first, when it was long like this, we referred to that, well, being a skirt, we referred to it as a maxi skirt, if you want to say that. Now, what we did was we shortened the length on it, and what we did was we made 3 kind of mini skirts out of it.
Okay.
And
quite appropriate for today's fashion times.
Right, so we're right in style. Now, here's the secret, and it's going to be very simple. I'll go right through it, is you want to score the steaks on both sides. And all you do is just cut in about 1/8 of an inch.
Okay.
Notice I'm going the one way, and what I'll do is I'll reverse it. This is what you call scoring the meat. Now, you can have your meat cutter do this for you, but he's a pretty busy person. Why don't you let him rest just a little bit? This is something you can do at home without a problem, but I'm sure he'd be happy to do it for you.
And you do that on both sides then?
On both sides.
It really needs a really sharp knife to do this.
Right, and just as I say, I'm just taking the tip of it, and I'm just cutting about 1/8 of an inch in, making kind of a diamond-shaped score. And this actually is going to help make the steak a little bit more tender than what it is. You don't need tenderizer, just scoring like this here, but be sure you score ahead of time.
All right.
Now what we're going to do is take these here, and you can take them for 5 minutes on one side, 5 minutes on the other side. That's all that's necessary. Like I said, it was quick, and the fact is you can do it on charcoal if you'd like, but at the same time you can do it in a broiler, and that's what we're going to do here today. And once it's done, maybe you can tell us what we could do with it from there.
Yes, when it's done, you'd want to serve this on a nice, crusty section of French bread. And what we've chosen to do is take a little bit of olive oil, heat that up in your saute pan, and just take some regular sweet green peppers, slice them up, and then saute those in that olive oil, and oh, that's going to add just a really nice crunchiness to that sandwich. And I think when those would come out of the broiler, you suggested that we could either sprinkle them with a little garlic salt,
Right.
or if you would prefer, just a little freshly ground pepper and salt. And we're going to show that a little bit later on in the show. And at that time, we'll also give you an address of where you can send for this evening's recipes. And now that we finished with our lighter type of meat entree, we're going to go on to a recipe for beef teriyaki. John, what slice of meat are we going to use for our beef teriyaki today?
Well, this, Bonnie, is called a flank steak. Now, people have probably heard of this, but again, when's the last time you cooked it? One reason is that for a period of time you couldn't get one in the counter, because actually it's a flank. It comes off the flank of the cattle itself, and there's only 2 per cattle. Just like the skirts we talked about earlier, there's only 4 per cattle. But now with the innovation of boxed meats coming in, a store can sell a large quantity of these. They can order a box of 20 or 30 with no problem at all. And it's getting to be a popular cut of meat.
Much more common today in the counter.
Before the beef teriyaki, we go into that, just some ideas here with a flank steak that you can use is you can take a flank steak and you can slice it, maybe about 3/4 of an inch right on down like this, and slice it on the bias, because you'll get a bigger angle instead of cutting straight down. Put a little angle into it. And then you can make pepper steak out of that. Excellent pepper steak. But along with that, you can cut it just a little bit thinner, maybe 1/4 inch strips. Then you can make a stir-fried. I've been using flank steak quite a bit for stir-fries. But we're talking today about a beef teriyaki. Now, this was a recipe that was given to me by Sherry and her husband, David Rosenthal. The first time they had us over after they were married, she served this to my wife and I. And I remember leaving the house, and I told Marilyn, I said, if Sherry can cook like that, knowing the way Dave likes to eat, I said, that marriage is going to last for a long time. But here's kind of the instructions she gave me. And we got the flank steak here. And remember how we scored the skirt steak a little while ago? But it's going to be a little bit different here. We're going to cut a little bit, just a little bit deeper, and we're going to put slits into it. And you like this here. See how I'm opening them up there?
Oh,
yeah. Put slits across like this here. And we're going about, maybe about halfway through the steak. And you'll see why I'm doing this in just 1 minute. I'm actually kind of making a pocket here, as you'll see. Now, once we have that done, we're going to get ready to marinate it, which you being the cook chemist, we're going to let you handle that part of the recipe. But what I'm going to do, meanwhile, is you've got these slits of garlic, and I'm going to start inserting them in those little pockets like this. And then I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Now, this recipe calls for 1 cup of wine, white wine, and Sherry said that she really likes to use the Almaden Mountain Rhine wine the best. So we'll have 1 cup of wine and 1/3 cup of soy sauce, a tablespoon of honey, the 6 medium cloves, and 4 tablespoons of grated ginger, and 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. Now we're going to assemble those ingredients. Now, Sherry did mention that if you did not like honey or didn't have any, that you could just substitute a tablespoon of regular white sugar for that instead. She also gave us a little tip, which we're not going to be using today, but she said sometimes the honey is a little bit hard to get mixed in, and if it is, if you can take and mix the honey in with the soy sauce and put it in a measuring cup and put it in your microwave and just give it a little 20 seconds worth, and it'll warm that honey up a little bit so it mixes in a little bit better. But I think we're going to be doing all right. Our warm lights here help to make things mix in quite easily. And then we have our 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and then we have our freshly grated ginger. Another tip that she gave us was that she said if you freeze that ginger first, it's going to be a lot easier for you to grate. And one of the other things that she said is after this is marinated, and you really should marinate it for a minimum of 3 hours up to about 24 hours so that it gets the nice flavor, and then it will act as a tenderizing agent for the beef. But before you cook it, She said you have to take the cloves of garlic out of the flank steak, and you have to drain off the marinade and brush off the ginger. You don't want that ginger to stay on there. Get as much off as you can. Then she suggested that the way she really likes to prepare it is to get a skillet on the stove nice and hot. And you sear it on one side, cook it, lower the heat, and cook it for just 2-3 minutes. Turn up the heat again, turn the flank steak over and sear it on the other side, and then turn it down again and cook it for another 2 or 3 minutes. She said ideally about, medium rare is the way it should be served. You don't really want it real rare because you won't have had enough chance for the marinade to kind of caramelize in the pan. And she said it might be a little bit too hot for you then because the ginger does have some nip to it, and there has been quite a bit that has been used in this recipe. So we'll just pour this over our flank steak.
Oh, I can taste it already.
And put it in the refrigerator, and then marinate it. She also said that this was a good marinade for a butt steak. It was good for pork chops, and it was also good for chicken. So it's a very versatile marinade. And there again, if you would use it for anything of those other items, you would be sure you would want to scrape that ginger off before you do cook it. Now, after it's cooked, how are we going to slice that, John?
Well, remember how I had it there and I was putting the pockets in, and I mentioned about slicing the pepper steak. What you want to do again is you got to remember is to slice on the bias. Don't cut straight down because you're only going to get small strips about so. But if you cut on a little angle and just keep going about 1/4 inch serving pieces like this, keep going along like that, you're going to end up with slices about yay big. And that'll be ideal for a couple slices per person. One steak like that can feed 4 people with no problem at all. It weighs approximately 1.25 pounds, but it's no waste. No waste.
Yes, that's the really wonderful thing, and it's all done for you. You don't have to be trimming it or anything else.
Right.
Great. Our next recipe that's going to be coming up is one that also uses the flank steak, but it's a stuffed flank steak. This stuffed flank steak recipe, John, is one that's a little unique, and that is because you can cook it one of 2 ways, and I'll talk a little bit about that later as I'm rolling it. But what I really need with this flank steak is I need this to be a wider flank steak. So could you show me how we would butterfly that open so I get a nice piece so I can make a nice stuffed roll?
Yes, and by the way, Bonnie, be sure this is something you ask your meat cutter to do, unless you're a little bit more skillful than us, because it can get very dangerous.
All right.
Now see, as you go in again, using the sharp knife, start at the one end. By the way, you can just have a little pocket put in. You know, you could work it around and just have a pocket put in and put a stuffing in that way.
And then not roll it.
Right. But for what you want done with a butterfly here, as you notice, I'm trying to keep it where there's an even portion of meat on both sides.
Both sides.
Okay.
And
you
if
can see how difficult it can be.
Right, and if it turns out that it's not quite the same thickness, I have a little meat pounder here that we can make it.
Very good. In the markets, we would do it with a cleaver. More likely, when we were done with this here, we would hit it with a cleaver. I'm afraid I'd break this bench though if I hit it.
Okay. Oh,
now,
that looks just
that's filet.
beautiful, and that makes a nice wider piece for me to use when I'm going to be rolling.
Well, one thing you want to remember, though, you could just put a stuffing here. I know you're going to make something quite elegant, but you could just put a stuffing here, and you could bring this back across around the stuffing and put toothpicks in. But I know you got a whole different recipe you're going to try, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Okay, well, the stuffing for this flank steak calls for a 1 package of 10-ounce chopped spinach. And then it calls for 2/3 of a cup of coarsely chopped fresh mushrooms, 1/2 cup of chopped onion, and 1 cup of cooked rice. And I have